My name is Show Brianand. Welcome to another edition of Horror Reanimated. Horror Reanimated is a show where we take dead concepts and we bring them to life. So, thank you for joining me. I know it's been a while since my last episode. Not going to make any excuses. Just going to say that hopefully, even if I don't get episodes out every single week, that I'll be getting episodes out much more frequently. And I'll also, if you're a wrestling fan, be doing this sort of idea for wrestling as well. But just go to bshowpodcast.com and you'll see those episodes on my page. So you'll see the B Show Podcast, you'll see Horror Reanimated, and eventually you'll see episodes of Wrestling Reanimated. So, like I said, we take dead concepts, we take fantasy concepts, we take fan theories, and we kind of remix them or we bring new life to them. And for this first solo edition, I'm going to be having guests from, whether friends of mine that are horror fans or people that are familiar with a certain topic, or hopefully I can get people from either writers or people that have worked on these films eventually. That's like my pipe dream. That's my pipe dream, is to get people like that, industry people who are familiar with these films or these ideas, to talk about them and to walk us through this. I'm not going to claim anything. I haven't asked him about it, but I've talked to the star of this episode. I guess the central figure of this episode, or the actor that played him, Mark Patton. I've talked to him a few times, exchanged messages and pleasantries on social media, especially about this subject. And he gave me his point of view. I would love to get him to do it on a podcast. Hopefully he can do that, and maybe we can do it around the time Scream Queen comes out. I'll be honest, I haven't even asked him. I don't know if he's up for it. So tonight we're talking about a concept that I was thinking of, and I know it's something that Mark has talked about. He's actually written about. You can find it online. Google Jesse's Lost Journals, Nightmare on Elm Street. And he put a lot of thought and a lot of work into this. Kind of came up with, in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy kept a journal. And in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Jesse, who moved into, if you're not familiar, Nancy's house 5 years after the events of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, finds her journal, and that's how he and his girlfriend Lisa find out about Freddy Krueger and everything that went on. So this is kind of a continuation of that. Jesse, writes in his own journal, and during the murders, after the murders, well beyond. And it's really fantastic, really fascinating stuff, especially if you're a fan of horror. And it's the ultimate fan fiction, because it's not just fan fiction. It's written by the guy who portrayed Jesse Walsh. And it's got a few little twists and turns that at one point my jaw dropped. I'm like, oh my God. Just the way he processed things when he read the script, that's the feeling that he took when he wrote Jesse's Lost Journals. So if you haven't checked out Jesse's Lost Journals and you're a horror movie fan, especially a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 fan, go and check it out. Seek it out on Google. I could even try to post a link in the description of this podcast if that helps anybody. So, but tonight I'm not going to talk about that. I can do a horror history video on that at some point, and hopefully let Mark Patton talk about that as people start talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street again, Part 2. With his Scream Queen documentary coming out. If you want to follow him on Instagram, he's on Mark Patton, NOES2. Super cool guy, very approachable. And he has a documentary coming out. He's touring with it right now. It's called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. And it's about the drama and backstage goings on of the making of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, the gayest horror film, which I've detailed at horrorhistory.com, Brian J's Horror History. And not just that, but like the effects it had on his life. He was a gay actor in Hollywood in the 1980s. He was outed, essentially, from this movie being made. And he had to leave Hollywood, or felt he had to. So go check it out. I have not seen it yet, but go follow him, and I'm pretty sure it will end up streaming somewhere eventually. So, but again, tonight we're not talking about that. We're talking about Jesse's Revenge. And this is something I thought of a long time ago. Again, if you're not familiar with the film, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger tries to take revenge on the vigilantes who killed him by attacking their children in their sleep and haunting their nightmares. The second film takes place 5 years after the original, with a new kid moving in on Elm Street, but instead of Freddy killing these kids in their sleep, he wants to use Jesse as an avatar and kill people through Jesse. And he wants to kind of invade Jesse in one of the most intimate of ways. And there was, again, a lot of double entendre there. So, some of it was intentional. Again, if you go check out Brian J's Horror History, I did a video about it. But Jesse's Revenge was something I thought of a few years ago. I'm a big fan of Friday or A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. And, I just realized, I'm looking around my office, I've got Jason masks that I've painted. I've got a Michael Myers mask on my bookshelf. I've got a lot of stuff. I got a Friday the 13th Final Chapter poster. I don't have a glove. I don't have a claw, a Freddy Krueger glove. That is something I need for my office. Anyway, let me get back. I'm ADD, so this thinking doesn't always stay on track. I'm just gonna warn you now. But it's part of the reason I'm doing separate podcasts now, because if I did all one podcast, it would never be the same subject, and people wouldn't know when to tune in if they don't like certain stuff. So thank you for joining me and staying with me. But I thought of Jesse's Revenge a few years ago. I've watched A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 numerous times, dozens of times. And it was a film that I saw when I was young, one of my first horror movies that I saw as a kid, and it kind of got me into horror movies. It was my gateway into horror movies. My 11 o'clock coffee. And, it's always kind of held a special place with me. I know a lot of people don't like it for numerous reasons. I don't dislike it for the reasons people do. I think, which I'll get into on another episode someday potentially. But I really enjoy this movie. I think Freddy is his scariest here. I think the idea of not just killing people, but actually like taking over your identity. I mean, I think that factors into it too. A loss of identity. You're doing things outside of your control because you're essentially possessed by Freddy Krueger. And not only are you afraid to go to sleep because you're afraid to die, but you're afraid of what you're going to do. I mean, on so many levels, this movie is a lot scarier than the original, although Wes Craven's original is a masterpiece. But I started thinking about, after the film, if you're not familiar, at the end of the film, it's not really Jesse who confronts Freddy, it's his girlfriend. When Jesse completely is taken over by Freddy, she stops him and uses their love and their friendship or their relationship, however you interpret their relationship. She uses that to break Freddy's grasp. And then through that, Jesse comes out the other end. And the one thing that bugged me about that is that Jesse never really has his comeuppance. And if you think about a lot of slasher films, even action films of the 80s, I mean, look at The Terminator. Linda Hamilton's character actually crushes the Terminator in the press machine. Laurie Strode in the original Halloween stabs Michael Myers and gets him with a knitting needle and Halloween H2O chops his fucking head off. I mean, there are a lot of characters in horror, even Ginny in Friday the 13th Part 2. Jason kills all of her friends, and at the end she buries a machete into his shoulder. Alice from the original. All of her friends die because of Mrs. Voorhees. And Alice chops her head off. I mean, there's a certain catharsis. And I don't know if it's because I grew up in the shadow of the 80s and in the 90s when that was still a big thing and action movies were king, but to me there was no catharsis with Jesse. He never really had that comeuppance. He was saved by his girlfriend. I mean, it underscored a lot of the issues with Jesse. In the film, he struggles with his strength and can he overcome, Freddy. And I'm not saying, don't mince my words, I'm not saying that because he's alluded to being gay, he's not strong. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, there are points in the movie where he's like, I can't do this. I'm just going to let him take me over because I can't fight it. I'm not strong enough. And it's his girlfriend who's strong enough to do it. She is the final girl. So she fits in with that trope. But Jesse himself, the guy who is really the focus of this film, never has comeuppance. But there is like some happy resolution to it. Mostly thanks to his girlfriend. And so I was thinking, like, if people have made the joke, I think Kim Myers, who was Lisa in the film, has made the joke that, maybe because of the gay connotation, maybe Jesse and what's her name, Lisa, end up like horror's Will and Grace, right? Living in some studio apartment in Manhattan, in the shadow, the distant shadow of this terrible thing that drew them together. So yeah, that's interesting, but still, I don't know. I don't think Jesse would be a restful person after this. I think he would always be on guard. But so much time has taken place between then and this movie. I think it'd be difficult to do that. So that's like your first starting point when I start thinking about these ideas. It's like, well, okay, we got to explain some shit. And since Jesse wasn't strong, I mean, I guess you could say, maybe Jesse's strengthening his mind and his body, right? So obviously Eastern philosophy, meditation, yoga, things like that, to strong and physically protect himself. If he's doing yoga, it wouldn't be probably a stretch for him to be taking martial arts, self-defense. But I had this idea. I was driving in my car and I was thinking about it the one day. And I was thinking about meditation. I think I was listening to the Joe Rogan Experience. And they're talking about different forms of consciousness. There's sleep, there's awake, there's dreaming, and there's meditation, a meditative state. There's hypnosis. And I started to think about, like, what if you play with those? So we've dealt with dreams and sleep and even Freddy being awake. And then it just hit me. It's like, well, wait a minute. In the first film and the other ones, Freddy has tried to invade people's dreams, right? The dreamscape, nightmares. In part 2, he really tried to come into the real world, and he accomplished that, and then Jesse beat him back. And I was just thinking, and I'm like, wait a minute. What if Freddy is stuck? What if he's stuck between the waking world and the dream world? Which is why he hasn't really come back. Because if you did this movie, a sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and it's 30 or 40 years later, you would almost have to go the Halloween 2018 route and just retcon everything. Because it wouldn't make sense. I don't think it would make sense. It would have to be like its own story on its own, a concept film, like a sequel in its own universe in a way. And I don't think it could coexist with the other ones. So if that's the case, then you can play a little bit. And it's like, okay, so if he's not in the waking world and he's not in the dreaming world, and to me, this idea kind of went lockstep. Maybe this is where it came from. I was doing a lot of research on Mark Patton's story for the video I did for Horror History about what happened to him. And now, 30, 35 years later, he's actually getting to tell his story and having some healing. So I started thinking, like, maybe Jesse wasn't running from Freddy. Like, imagine Jesse, and they touched on this in part 3 and 4. People actually trying to fight Freddy in the dream world. Like, I started thinking about if Jesse's a meditative guy, right? If he mastered the art of lucid dreaming, I just imagined like this weary, not grisly. He's he's wise, but like I imagined like stubble-faced, worn, weathered, but still some sort of exuberant because he has a personality. Just a charismatic guy. Like you see the shades in him, right? Because this is where I think if I'm looking at this film and where the original part 2 and where I think Jesse would be, I think you would still see the shades of old Jesse. He's like funny, a little awkward, but also you can see that he's got a dark side. You can see that shadow. You can see the wrinkles on his face. You can see the stubble on his face. You can see the withery hairs, and the gray in his hair. So I think he would have those shades of his old self, but just a darker side. And I could see, and follow me on this, and if you tell me what you think of this, if you think it's cool or not, email me, bshowbrian@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at bshowbrian as well. But just follow me for a second. Imagine Jesse spends 35 restless years searching his dreams and his nightmares for Freddy Krueger. And then what does that mean? Like, lucid dreaming. I mean, he goes to sleep every single night. When he has a lucid dream, he has no rest. Every dream he has, he's lucid because he's mastered it. He's been doing it so long that now he's physically searching his dreams for Freddy Krueger and trying to hunt him down and get his revenge. But he can't find him. He knows he's there somewhere, but he can't find him. And he can't get this closure. And it'd be interesting because I was thinking just leave it alone and it'll go away. But that's the darkness in Jesse. Like, he didn't have that catharsis. He needs to confront Freddy Krueger. He needs to exorcise that demon. But he doesn't realize if he would just leave it alone, it would go away. Right? So he's stuck somewhere. Jesse can't find him in his dreams. I was thinking about that line from Kim Myers. Maybe they're like Will and Grace. So whether Jesse's gay or not, I mean, maybe they are. Maybe he is, and it makes sense in this idea I had. But they're living together, and I think Lisa genuinely, if you watch the movie, loved Jesse. And Jesse may have loved her, but if the character was gay, and that's where you take it, and if they're living together, maybe there's this struggle there. He hasn't confronted, and again, I haven't like written a fan fiction treatment. I've just kind of gone over some ideas in my head. This is just these first couple episodes before I figure out just the format of everything, since it's kind of a new concept. I'm just going to be for the most part, it's going to be like this, like a pitch room, where I've got a couple ideas. We're going to throw them out. If I have guests on, we'll go back and forth, but I'm just going to try to flesh it out as I go, because I just have fun doing that. But in this case, if you take that into consideration, think of it this way. Jesse Jesse has this demon in his past that he can't let go of. So maybe in the real world, she's never let go of him. She still loves him. And she's never let him go. And she won't let that go. And maybe that's her problem. He is anchored to Freddy Krueger. This demon from his past. Literally, this demon from his past. She is anchored to Jesse. And make it topical. Like if you think about the tragedy that he would go through, and trying to deal with that trauma, he would probably be facing substance abuse problems. So maybe he's got a long history of drug use, right? I don't know. Maybe he's an alcoholic. Maybe he's been in and out of rehab. Maybe she's enabled him. You know, her parents were loaded, they always said. They were rich, they were loaded. So maybe she finances whatever. Maybe he's an artist. Maybe he is an artist, and this is one thing I was thinking too. Again, just thinking through the idea. Maybe he's trying to share his meditation or his lifestyle with other people. So maybe he's a yogi. Maybe he's a self-defense instructor. Maybe he's a master in jiu-jitsu. Maybe he knows nunchaku. He's all 4 Ninja Turtles rolled into one with a little Rick and Gracie. Yeah, I think that would be the dichotomy there is maybe Mark Patton, his temple is his body. He's a master of his mind, his body, and his soul in a way, but he still can't get over this. And he's still scarred. He needs his revenge. That's the whole idea here. You know, Grady was dead. He killed him. It would be interesting to try to figure out how they got out of Springwood, Ohio, and wound up where they did. And see, I'm from Ohio, so that's maybe another reason this movie resonated with me. The whole small town thing. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. I live in a little town that's like Little Haddonfield. It's essentially like if you took a little subdivision and a small town square and dropped it in the middle of a cornfield. So I kind of, that resonates with me, the small town Americana thing. But like, how would he get out of here? Would it be like the town's dirty little secret that they don't want to admit? And they try to contain it so he escapes and let him go? Maybe, and here's another topical thing. Have you ever noticed how like there's these politicians who they claim like homosexuality is immoral, and then they get caught in a bathroom like blowing some dude for money and some clandestine you know what I mean? It's always the guys that speak out so much about certain things that get caught doing it. Stuff like that. Like I could envision like Jesse having a relationship with somebody, and then he gets caught and gets arrested, goes to court as a young man after this all happens. But if the gay undercurrent is true and you go with that, and it's so compelling, I couldn't go with anything else, to be honest with you. So I just went with it. Yeah, like I can imagine like he has some tryst with some random guy and trying to deal with all the stuff and figure everything out, and then he goes to jail, and then when he goes to court, like the judge he walks up there, and the Honorable Judge Bartholomew will preside. He's like Jesse Walsh. Oh Christ! And Jesse was the guy that he had the encounter with. You know, I don't know. I like fun stuff like that. It was playful. There's not enough evidence here. You know, send him to psychiatric care, and then somehow a back door gets left open, and our a box at the evidence locker gets lost, and Jesse Walsh doesn't exist anymore. And then he meets up with Lisa. He spends a couple years, and again, I'm not saying go into this detail and tell it. This is all exposition and backstory, yo. But maybe the story is Jesse spent, 4 or 5 years on the run, and then, got lost in a big city, a big-ish city, Columbus, Cleveland, not far from home. And, maybe eventually Lisa moves to a city, to a loft apartment, and starts a bunch of businesses because her family's loaded, and she's a strong woman. So she starts some businesses, and she encounters him somewhere, and he's disheveled and broken, and she takes him in, and then the rest is history. She finances whatever he does. She protects him, probably enables him, because she loves him, and she can't let him go. Right? So that's their story, maybe. And then, 35 years later, Jesse still can't find Freddy. He just can't let it go. So then maybe, the thing with these movies has always been, people are afraid to go to sleep. They take not sleeping pills. They take speed, and I guess in this day and age it'd be Adderall. But they take these drugs and these chemicals, and they drink coffee to try to stay awake. I think it'd be interesting if Jesse spent most of his free time sleeping. If you're thinking about the movie and how a Nightmare on Elm Street movie would probably open, it's a dream, right? And it's just weird, and it's calling back to part 2. Maybe it's Jesse, and he's kind of dorky, and he's in Springwood, and maybe he's working some weird job, whatever, IT guy, whatever. And, there's some shit going on, and maybe he's with a girl, and it's not going so well. And he immediately is cued in, and he's like, oh, this is a dream. And it doesn't say it out loud, obviously, but he's looking around, and then the things around him change, like the sky is a weird color, and instead of the neighborhood, all the houses are burned out. But he's still in this little scene tightly contained around him. It looks normal. Or I'm looking at a picture for my Christmas pictures with my family right now. My wife and I are sitting in front of a hearth, and it looks like we're in a living room with our kids. But then it's in the middle of the woods because she just set it up to look like, it's a really sweet picture. But I'm thinking stuff like that, notice, because if you've ever had a lucid dream, that's the thing that a lot of times tips you off, is if you're in the dream and shit just doesn't make sense, and all of a sudden you become aware. That's what I'm talking about with him, with lucid dreaming, man. So he's walking around, and he's looking for Freddy. Where would you look for Freddy? Shadows, dark alleyways, seedy places, I don't know. Tease that there's something there, but there's nothing really there. He's frustrated and all of it, and he wakes up, right? And it's 3 p.m. Lisa comes in, and she's like, damn it, Jesse. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He grabs his coffee, his giant, my Uncle Gary used to have the old Dunkin' Donuts. It's like a coffee pot. He'd pour a whole coffee pot of coffee, and he'd have it in the morning. But, he grabs his giant turbo chug of coffee from, 7-Eleven that's been sitting out since the night before, and he just starts downing it. And he goes out on this nice terrace, and it's almost dusk on this loft apartment on the lake or whatever, because it's Cleveland. I was talking about Cleveland, so... and she just is like, hey, man, I love, I don't mind you being here, and we've been doing this a long time, but I can always tell around this time of year, because obviously the anniversary or whatever, I can always tell because you sleep more than you're awake. All you do is sleep all day. You go to teach your yoga classes. You come home, you barely eat. You paint some weird shit. So maybe he's an artist. You paint some weird shit. You tell me everything's fine, and you sleep for another 12 hours. You can't do this. You're wasting your life, man. And he's like, well, you don't understand. And she's like, well, yeah, no, I was there too. Because obviously she took part in it. You know, and maybe she's trying to figure out, shit, it's been 35 years, man. So internally she's having this struggle like, you know, I've been anchored to this dude for 35 years. It's not going to go anywhere. It never was, never will. He's fucking gay. He's not straight. He's not into me. What am I doing? So, like, she's got this struggle that she's dealing with him in their past, in their relationship. And is it worth it? Maybe he is seeing someone or has partners or whatever, and it kills her, but he, like, doesn't get it. And, like, you have all of this kind of bubbling to the surface. You know, and she thinks he's going to relapse, and maybe he will. Who knows? What's he doing? What's he taking? He's sleeping all goddamn day. What's he taking to help him sleep? Which I thought that was that'd be a really interesting take on this, because everyone tries to take stuff to stay awake. He'd be the first one to take shit to go to sleep. With the express purpose of taking out Freddy. And then there was something else I was thinking of. It's like, okay, so now what do you do? Because you can't see him. You can't get him. How does he come out? Right? Well, where is he and what's going on? I just imagine Jesse, maybe with the drug problem, he tries to score. And maybe he takes some shit, and then he runs in to do his... Because he has a sense of duty. He doesn't want to let people down, even though he's a mess. Something happens where, like, maybe he's taking a Xanax, and someone cancels, so he has to go fill in. So he goes to teach this meditation class with this group, with these yogis. And maybe he's sitting there with this group of, like, this women's group. Self-defense. Maybe his little thing is funded by her, but maybe his project is, you know, self-defense, you know, women's classes and self-defense, like, so self-defense and yoga and meditation and stuff like that. So maybe he's sitting there with this group of like 20 women at twilight, and he's going through his paces, meditation, and you hear the chiming of the little tea kettle thing, the bowl that they use, I don't know. And all of a sudden, he's meditating, but he's taking some Xanax. And this is the other thing too, is like there's a lot of played off the Roseanne Barr thing from a couple months ago. You know, she supposedly tweeted all that stuff when she took Xanax. And apparently, I've never taken it, but apparently, not Xanax, what is it? The sleeping medication that people take. Ambien, not Xanax, Ambien. So like maybe he takes a fistful of Ambien because he just doesn't want to deal with everything that's going on with her on his back, with the anniversary of what's gone on in his life, that he's trying to deal with everything. So maybe Jesse takes a fistful of Ambien and then gets drugged half awake to go teach this, to lead this group meditation thing. And I just imagine, he's like in this weird in-between place where he opens his eyes. Like, when you like my daughter did it tonight. I went to pick her up off the couch. She fell asleep on the couch. I went to carry her up to bed, and she sits up and goes, "Mr. Josh," and that's her aftercare teacher. I was like, "Huh?" She goes, "What's his name?" Like, who? What are you talking about? What are you dreaming about? And she's like, "What's his name?" I said, "Who?" She said, "Mr. Josh." I'm like, well, obviously Mr. Josh is his name. My daughter talks in her sleep, and sometimes she walks in her sleep, which is scary. She came all the way down the steps one time in the middle of the night when it scared the shit out of me. I was in the kitchen getting something, and she walks downstairs. But anyway, that's maybe that when you first wake up and you're not really aware what's going on, time, space, and all that. So maybe Jesse is in that kind of state, and he looks up, and maybe Freddy's in. Maybe he sees in flashes, like when you're watching TV and you kind of nod off, and you wake up, and You've been asleep for more than just a minute or two, but like it seems instantaneous. It's like maybe Jesse's in this weird state, and maybe this is the thing. Maybe Freddy is trapped. And it's not just between worlds, like I mentioned before at the top of the podcast. Like Freddy's MO was dreams. Then he switched MOs and tried to come to the real world, succeeded, and then when Jesse sent him away, maybe it was somewhere between those worlds, and the key was the Ambien, the hypnotic state, the meditation. Maybe it would just, after so long, the right combination hit, and he's in the right frame of mind where Jesse unlocks him. And maybe he still can't come out, but maybe Jesse has to be in that sort of state, right? So, Jesse's kind of trying to stay awake, and he's trying to lead the class, and all of a sudden he sees this vision of Freddy standing there. Or not Freddy, but maybe he just sees a shadow, and he's wearing a fedora and a dirty hat or a dirty sweater, And all of a sudden he's one of the ladies in his class, Freddy grabs her and picks her up by the with his claws, almost like was it Halloween 2 when Michael uses the scalpel and lifts Janet up, or Nurse Karen by the back. So something like that, but Freddy's got her with his claws, right? Almost like a marionette puppet, or not a marionette, like a Muppet. He's up through her, and she's screaming and just bleeding everywhere. And all of a sudden Jesse wakes up. And again, I'm just trying to think through it. Maybe he doesn't wake up. Maybe it just maybe he sees it and then he doesn't see it, and he's trying to figure out like what's going on. And we're trying to figure out what's going on because it's got to be weird for us too, right? Watching the movie. So I don't know. Maybe he sees Freddy just shredding her. And then Jesse wakes up, and all the women around him are up and screaming. There's blood everywhere, and he looks down, and he's holding this woman in his lap. Right? Mayhem breaks out. He's awake now. Freddy's gone. Something terrible has happened. He has no idea what happened. Right? Like, when he was out, did he do this? Now the police come. Now they're going to fingerprint him. Now they got to take him for questioning. Now this whole thing's going to unravel. Now his whole life is going to unravel. All because he had to poke the bear. He couldn't leave it alone. And that's, a metaphor for something that I've dealt with in my life with anxiety. Is a lot of times I have made things in my life, problems, stressful situations, I've made them even worse for myself and for people around me by giving it energy and attention. And if I'd have just kind of stepped back and, wipe my hands of the situation, it wouldn't have been as bad. Not nearly as bad. So, in this case, it's kind of mimicking that. Like, and again, subtext in lessons. Not, people talk about how there's socio-political and messages in movies now, and there never used to be. Yeah, there was. There always used to be. There's messages in every movie. It's just a lot of the more skilled filmmakers can get their messages across, but use subtext or use themes in the movie, so people who aren't looking for it won't know. It'll go over their heads and go by them. And people like you and I that like to dissect these things will notice, and we'll get it, and we'll talk about it for years to come. But anyway, this is the part of the lesson of this film is like the less attention you give certain things, the less it will have control over you, your life, your mental state, your emotional state, your anxiety level, your lot in life. And Jesse's going to learn that the hard way. His whole life is coming down around him. He makes a bad decision, and now he's kind of opened Pandora's box, right? So now he's trying to piece it together. And it's the other thing too, is like, I hate when things are completely spelled out, like in movies, like this works this way because of this, and this is the reason that backs it up, the science or whatever. I wouldn't even do that. I wouldn't do that. I'd honestly Keep it vague. But if you do enough of this stuff, it's like that's the general idea. You don't have to explain it scientifically. But like I said, he takes a handful of Ambien. He tries to overdose or pass out in the studio. He just can't do it anymore. Maybe he thinks Lisa's going to leave. Maybe he does have the boyfriend who's an assistant of his at the studio. I don't know, another teacher. Maybe a self-defense teacher. Maybe a jiu-jitsu practitioner. Like I said, he's all four Ninja Turtles mixed with Ricks and Gracie and a little, I'm not going to make that joke. But, maybe his partner has taught him about self-defense, right? So, I don't know. So maybe there's a lot going on with him. And this is why everything starts coming down. He just can't manage it anymore. And this, in his darkest moments, again, is where Freddy's going to come back and rear his burned, charred head. And then you could go really anywhere from there. And again, I'm just throwing ideas out there. I just think it'd be really cool for Jesse to have this confrontation with Freddy. So, like, think of it, like, take, obviously he's on drugs. Now he's getting questioned. Maybe he attempts suicide and he's in a coma. He's being kept alive by a ventilator or something like that. And drifting in and out of consciousness. So he's, maybe Lisa was going to, maybe that's why he took a fistful of Ambien and tried to kill himself. Because maybe Lisa told him she was done with his shit. Maybe that's your emotional hook to this, that big emotional moment with your great performances. Maybe she comes out and she just tells him, like, I fucking love you. I love you so much. I have foregone, relationships. I've foregone, sexual encounters. I've foregone happiness. In my college years, I had a little bit of fun, but I always felt guilty because I never knew where you were. I spent more time thinking of you than on my studies or on my boyfriends or my sorority sister, whatever the fuck. And then she finally breaks down crying. She's like, I love you, but I can't live this life anymore. I got to move on. How old would she be, right? It was 35 years after. She was 17, 18. So what, she's in her 50s? She's like, I'm 50 fucking years old. My life is almost over and it never got started. Like, I'm a professional. I'm successful. I got money in fake plastic shit. But I'm never going to have you. So where does that leave me? I'm lonely. I'm a lonely bitch, Jesse. But you know what I mean? That's the catalyst, maybe. I don't know. Again, I haven't written this out. I'm just kind of bullshitting here. And then maybe you got like the hospital. This I did think about. It's like maybe you have your general hospital moment where Jesse's on a ventilator and she's driving in her car. She's on her way out of town. She's done, got her bags packed. And or like the star-crossed thing. Like maybe she said she was done and she was going to pack her bags and go. And she was leaving town. And then she has a change of heart and she comes back. Except Jesse already saw that she packed up and like gave him the notice to get the fuck out of the house. So he left. And she knew, like, when she got back, she sees like the note on the floor, and maybe he wrote her a note like, goodbye, this is for good. You don't have to leave, I'll leave. And I don't just mean the house, the town. I'm done. I'm checked out. I'm checking out. Just ain't taking any bags with me, baby. And then, of course, like, she finds out on the news that, man, local yogi involved in incident, right? But again, that's the thing, is maybe he goes to the police station. He's loopy. He's trying to figure out what's going on in the police. And maybe he hears on the way out, when they're taking him out, he's trying to figure out what's going on. And he hears one of the girls giving, who's in the class I was talking about, the yoga meditation thing. maybe he overhears a witness saying, no one saw anything. We heard screaming. We opened our eyes. She was bleeding everywhere, and she was cradled in his arms. And the police is like, who, the teacher? And she's like, no. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? She's like, it was almost like a phantom or a ghost, and it sounds weird. And they're laughing, oh, come on. She's like, no, I didn't see his face. The only thing, maybe Jesse hears this, the only thing I saw was the shadow of a man in a old-fashioned, like, Indiana Jones hat and a red and green sweater. Like, those ugly, like, because again, it's going to be a modern movie. Like, those ugly Christmas sweaters that you wear as a joke around Christmas? It was like a dark, like a red and green with a dirty brown hat. And I couldn't see his face, his features, anything. It was like he was there and then he was gone. So the only thing saving Jesse and putting him at ease is like, well, I didn't do it, but I did kind of cause this. At least I didn't kill her, right? And now the cops are like, oh shit, what's going on? Because like they live in Ohio. If the Freddy Krueger stuff happened in Springwood, obviously there would have been a local legend. I mean, shit, there's a thing called Forgotten Ohio. And you can look up by county every like urban legend, haunted place. Like here in Toledo, there's a rocky shoreline. There's like they call it the something spot, where apparently like, it's one of those urban legends where like someone was apparently hit by a car, and if you stop your car on this specific spot, your car will stall out and he'll come for you. Like there all sorts of shit like that. You can look it up by county. So obviously they hear red and green sweater, brown hat, ugly dude, but he was there and gone, like a phantom. And like like maybe Jesse goes to be fingerprinted, and he's asked questions, and he says he doesn't know what happened, right? So he's trying to avoid things because of his past. So like obviously this would be a lot less a horror movie than a character movie. Almost like they got away with it with the Joker. The Joker wasn't a comic book movie. It wasn't a DC movie, really. It was just a study of the Joker and how he came to be. And a damn good movie at that. But I think you could get away with it, especially with fans that dig this movie. I don't know how wide this would appeal to, but anyway. Yeah, man, I just envision like he leaves the police station and again tries to kill himself, maybe with like a fatal dose of heroin or something like that. Collapses, goes to the hospital. Whatever. So now he's in the hospital. Lisa hears about it. She feels bad about everything that happened. She goes to see him at the hospital. She's going to tell him that it doesn't matter as long as he's in her life, that she knows she can move on now. She's lying to herself because she'll never move on completely. Like, if you're in my life, you're always welcome. I'm sorry. And she goes to tell him this. And she walks in, and Jesse's lover is sitting by his bed. The Cuba Gooding Jr. to his Tom Hanks is sitting by his bedside with his hand in his arms and his hands, praying that Jesse's okay. And that's as far as she gets, and she goes home. Right? Then I was thinking, like, okay, now we're here. Everything, all the heavy shit's happened. How does he get out? Right? How does Freddy get out? Well, maybe Jesse's on life support. He's had an overdose of like heroin or something, whatever. And as strong as he is mentally and spiritually, physically, he's a mess right now. So he's vulnerable. And maybe he fades in and out of consciousness and the respirator's keeping him open or alive. Right, so like maybe, excuse me. I don't know, maybe something happens and his heart stops. Or maybe he dies on the table momentarily. Right? And they come in and resuscitate him. Or resuscitate, I don't know. Resuscitate, I don't know how to say the fucking word. But they bring him back to life. He flatlines for a minute, and then they bring him back to life, and oh my God, everything. Thank God we saved him. But he's still, like, unconscious. Now Freddy, maybe after they resuscitate him, he's sitting there. Lights all over the hospital start to flicker. Jesse's unconscious now. So maybe that releases him. I don't know. I don't know the science behind this shit. I'm just making this up as I go. So I don't know. Maybe that momentary flatlining for Jesse, his heart stops, and they come in and revive him. Maybe that combination releases Freddy. And maybe we don't know it yet. I don't know. But, everything's good, but then all of a sudden lights start flickering all over the hospital. Jesse's in ICU. Maybe the rooms next door, there's shit going on where people's monitors are turning off and they're dying or they're being killed in their sleep, and it's boom, 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 and it's like a bloodbath all over this ICU. And then we go back to Jesse's room, and Jesse's in the bed, and his boyfriend's sitting in the chair doing something, and he hears Jesse's machine going off. He's flatlining again. So he jumps up, and there's no one around. Nobody around. I am making this up as I go along, but this is something I did think of. Full disclosure, okay? I didn't make this up off the top of my head. He goes down to give him mouth-to-mouth. Jesse wakes up. Oh my God, I thought I lost you. They embrace, maybe exchange a kiss. I don't know. They're gay dudes, they would do that. And then maybe not from a point of view, but we see a close-up on Jesse's boyfriend as he pulls back. And he looks down, and it's Freddy instead of Jesse in the bed. Okay, so now we didn't realize it was a dream. We're so caught up in whether or not Jesse was dead. He just kissed Freddy, and now Freddy just, right, his glove, 4 fingers, wham, right in the face, right in the mouth. I would have to resist the urge to write the line, "Pucker up, buttercup," or whatever the hell. Because I don't like comedic Freddy as much. This would be a really, really horrific scene. Or, like, gouges his eyes out. Whatever. Freddy goes to town, right? And Jesse wakes up and he sees his boyfriend in the chair sleeping, just getting hacked to pieces. And he can't do anything about it. And the doctors are in different areas of the hospital. They come in. Jesse's there in blood, grabbing his boyfriend, trying to shake him awake. And of course the doctors think Jesse did it now. And he's like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, what's going on?" And he knows this will never end. This will never end. So then, of course, there you go. That'll lead you to the big climax. Maybe from there, he's like, "Oh, God, where's Lisa?" So you go home, and there's Lisa, and she's sitting on her bed, and maybe she's about to go to sleep. Stands up, and she looks around, and she's in her old house. You're like, what the fuck? Now, again, this is something I did think of. So, again, I'm not thinking of all this off the top of my head. Some of it did come to me. Just kind of pondering the subject. Got to have some structure with these shows. I'm brand new. I'm out of the gate. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along. But you got to have some structure to the story if you pitch something. But no, the thing I was thinking is, like, again, the fake out, right? She's sitting in her bed. She's reading a magazine, or she's writing a letter to Jesse, whatever. She gets up because she hears something at her window in her bedroom, and she walks over and she looks out the window, and it's a bunch of kids down at a pool that looks sort of familiar, having a good time. She's like, what the fuck is going on? It looks down, and that looks like my friends. Those are my friends, like, what, from high school. And they're all at the party and do that, like, weird, hellish, like, Freddy thing where, like, I don't know, maybe they're dead, maybe they're alive, the other thing I was thinking is maybe it's like just like a moment in time, as if she's watching everything that's about to take place. And then she watches, and she hears screams from downstairs, and it's her and Jesse as Freddy fighting. Freddy appears out by the pool and starts slashing people. So essentially what she's doing, she's standing at her bedroom window. And she's looking down at what would have been her pool party back in like 85, 86. Well, what year was it? 84, 89. And she sees Freddy going at all the pool people. Right? And then her dad shoots the gun, and then Freddy, maybe instead of disappearing, he turns and he looks up at her. And then the camera turns to look at her. And she's in her parents' house. Kind of a throwback to part 3 where I think during the nightmare didn't, what's her name? Patricia Arquette's character. Doesn't she wind up back at the Nightmare on Elm Street house? But in this case, it would be Lisa's house. And then much like Nancy in the original, he shows up in the bedroom and he's going after her, right? And maybe right before he gets to her and kills her, like last time it was Lisa saving Jesse from Freddy. Maybe this time Jesse gets to Freddy and Lisa right before. So maybe he shows up at their house. I don't know how the rules of the dream world work. Maybe he shows up at her house, takes a fistful of Ambien, puts himself to sleep, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to end this one way or the other, motherfucker. I've waited 35 years. It's cost me my life. It's cost me my sanity, my reputation. I can't go back to this. I'm likely going to die when this shit all hits my system. But I'm going to take you with me. And this may be cartoony. This may be just me being like action, like in action movies from the 80s, right? My toxic masculinity is showing. But I just imagine like again, Jesse being a master of his mind, body, and spirit, even though he's slowing down because he's on death's doorstep at this point from a couple different overdoses and pills. And the point is, he's so adept at fighting and using his mind like the kids in part 3 did, that he's like Bruce Lee in a Street Fighter game fighting Freddy Krueger. Again, I know this may be a little cartoonish, but like he's manifesting like energy, lightning, orbs, like real weapons, like stuff he would use in the dojo. And of course, Freddy's in the dream world, and he's at full strength. And they're going at it, man. And that was one thing from part 3 that I really wish they would have done better. Is you had these kids realize that they had the ability to go into their dreams and manipulate, that realm. But there was only 1 or 2 that was really that successful. Everyone else just got killed when they fought against Freddy. I feel like to make that concept really stick, you should have had a couple of them kick the shit out of Freddy. Because a lot of times they did some cool stuff, like, oh, now I'm a wizard master. But then he gets killed in 5 seconds anyway. Or the tough, greaser chick, she, the drug addict, pulls out her knives and she tries to fight him for like 5 seconds, and then his fingers turn into syringes and he stabs her. So I think there was some stuff that could have been done. And in this case, I'd like to see that. He's essentially Bruce Lee in the game of death. He's going after him. Or Liu Kang versus Shang Tsung, and maybe Freddy turns into to Jesse's victims for a second. And maybe that's how he breaks him down. He confronts Jesse, and Jesse gets weak again. I don't know. But I think, again, the story, partially thought out, partially just off the top of my head, would be a really good way to have a cathartic confrontation between Jesse and Freddy. And I know that not a lot of people... Oh, there's no end. Sorry. I was just thinking to myself, what's the end? There's no end. I have no idea. How do you end that? How do you end Freddy? No one's been able to do it. And I think the ironic thing is, Freddy was trapped all that time in Jesse's mind somewhere. If he'd just let it go, he probably would have never got out. If Jesse stayed strong, he could have kept him in prison there probably forever. Or at least until he died. And I think that's going to be the ironic thing, is Jesse's going to defeat Freddy in some way. Excuse me. But that's one reason I don't like ghost horror movies a lot of times, is because there's no resolution. Like, how do you vanquish a ghost? There's usually some corny, like, ankh or incantation or artifact, or you trap the spirit, and maybe that's what he does. Maybe in all of his studies of Eastern philosophy, Jesse has some urn or orb or artifact, which again borders on corny. If we're doing this like really serious version character study, this redemption story for Jesse, for him to have his comeuppance after 35 years, it'd be really weird to have like some sort of talisman. But I really don't know what else you would do. Because what's he going to do? Is Jesse, through his knowledge of Eastern philosophy and spirituality, what's he going to do? Is he going to manipulate Freddy's spirit, tear it apart? Is he going to strip his power so that he can't come back? Maybe that's it. And Freddy can always come back. But in this case, I'm trying to think, like, man, what would you do? You know, Dan Aykroyd's not going to show up with a proton pack and, like, suck him in. I don't know. Maybe almost like Matrix style, right? Jesse's Neo of the dream world. I'm Neo. I'm Jesse Walsh. Oh man, that would make so many chicks, so many horror chicks, fucking randy as hell. If you cast, instead of Mark Patton, if you cast Keanu Reeves as Jesse Walsh, and he gets to, you know, John Wick Freddy out of existence. Oh my God. But no, like, you know, think of the Matrix when the original one, when Neo like jumps into Agent Smith and tears him apart. I'm not saying Jesse has to. That would be really poetic, wouldn't it? With the undercurrent of Freddy wanting to enter Jesse. Wink, wink. You get it? Nice subtext, Dave Chaskin. Not really subtext. But, you know, Jesse enters Freddy. He absorbs him. And again, I'm not trying to, you know, joke on that level, but it's just kind of funny how my sophomore brain attaches to those things. But like, yeah, maybe he absorbs Freddy's energy and it kills him. But it's enough to like send Freddy out of existence. Or you could create another mythology, I guess. Like if he does catch him in some sort of talisman, and Jesse dies, maybe there's an urn at the end of the film that Lisa carries, and she's telling the story to her kids. And the kids always ask who that urn is, and she's always like, "Oh, that's You know, everyone's like, oh, is it your friend Jesse? But it's not Jesse. It's Freddy's remains. And it's in some sacred ancient urn. Some relic of Eastern religions of millennia ago. And now she's got in her family line, that's her lineage, she will forever be attached to Jesse and Freddy, because now she'll pass this down to her kids and has to teach them all about all this stuff. I don't know. You could go in a lot of different directions with it. You know, either Jesse rips him apart, does something to trap him. I don't know. How would you end it? If you had a Jesse versus Freddy face-off, or even in a Freddy Krueger film, and don't take the cop-out answer, you sissy, and say, oh, I'd never end him. Freddy's amazing. I love his movies. I'm not talking about that. I'd love to watch Freddy's movies too, man. I love them. It's a shame we haven't gotten another try at a Freddy movie since that crappy remake did it back in like 2011, but I don't control these things. I just podcast about them. So, like, what would you do? How would you vanquish Freddy? And if you were going to see a Jesse's Revenge type movie, how would you like to see it play out? Let me know. bshowbrian@gmail.com is my email. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at bshowbrian. Horror Reanimated, once again, is going to be your place for bringing these concepts to life. Taking these dead concepts and unused ideas, alternate script ideas, all sorts of shit I'm going to be looking up. Here, let me pull up my Google Docs, and not dachshund, like wiener dog, but let me pull up my Google Docs. I'm going to read through a couple different ideas that I want to go through just to give you guys a preview. So, Horror Reanimated, here's some ideas. Bride of, which would be if you take different horror icons and do a Bride of movie, how that would affect, because they had, of course, Bride of Frankenstein, Bride of Dracula, and then they did Bride of Chucky, which was really interesting. So what would other movies like that look like? Around Christmas time, someone else came up with the fan theory that Kevin McAllister ends up being Jigsaw. I would love to talk about that around Christmas time, probably this coming year. Let's see. The Necronomicon link, Jason Goes to Hell. So Jason versus the Evil Dead. I know me and my old podcast partner, Benny Slash, talked about that on an episode, but I'd like to revisit that. Talking about the Evil Dead sequel that never happened with Mia and Ash joining forces, which I think would have been a really cool idea. I wasn't a huge fan of the new remake, although it was voted by Bloody Disgusting, I believe it was, as the number one horror movie of the 2010s, which, okay, whatever. That's just like your opinion, man. Looking at the Blumhouse Halloween, a Tommy and Lindsay story, an idea like this, like Jesse's Revenge, but instead Danielle Harris returning to take on Michael Myers, and what that would look like, her getting a redemption story. I did the Nightmare on Elm Street 2 sequel, and we can always revisit this again. We're not limited to just doing this once and done. I mean, we can revisit later or get someone else's perspective or inspiration, or if I have a guest on and they have a take on it, we could do that too. Alternate Halloween 7 ideas. There's a Thorn version that Daniel Farron's kind of outlined. And I gotta plug the Taking Shape book. If you have not read Taking Shape, go to Amazon right freaking now. Order Taking Shape by Dustin McNeil and Travis Mullins. It's freaking great. I'm trying not to say effing so much, because if you're a parental advisory podcast, your visibility is lower on iTunes, from what I've found out. So, Taking Shape, Developing Halloween from Script to Scream by Dustin McNeil and Travis Mullins. I'm pretty sure they both write for Bloody Disgusting. And if I'm wrong, I apologize, guys. But I've talked to Dustin and Travis, told them that I really loved the book. Basically, if you're a fan of Halloween and you've seen the documentaries, you'll know some of the nuts and bolts how-to stuff or how it happened, like how the film was made, the mask, all that production stuff. But there are cool interviews with like Tommy Lee Wallace and script people and producers where they kind of dig in on a few of the things, especially Halloween 3, and they illuminate what his name, Nigel Neal's original script called for, which is something that I would love to talk about. Again, another episode of Horror Reanimated. I've got like 5 or 6 ideas that I could name off the top of my head without looking at my notes from this book alone. And hopefully I can have Dustin or Travis on eventually to talk about their book, because they have another one coming out about the Lost sequels, which is right up our alley. So, again, go check them out. Buy their stuff because it's really good. Go check them out on, I believe, Bloody Disgusting. You can follow them on social media. They're easy to find. But again, my name is Brian J. B. Show Brian to be exact. This is Horror Reanimated, and I'll see you next time.